Good morning, Ms. Shembri. I'm afraid we just need to remember to do the switching, otherwise we may not be heard at the back. Can I just first of all introduce you formally to the inquiry, please? You are Angela Shembri, is that correct? It is? Yes, I am. And you are Planning Director at RPS. You hold a Master of Town and Country Planning, and you are a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and you have over 16 years experience in private sector town planning consultancy, is that correct?
It is.
You've been instructed on a number of airport aviation related projects, including in relation to Stansted Airport, where you provided strategic planning advice as part of the consultant team, and you helped to prepare the planning applications for both the proposals to make better use of the existing runway and the development of the second runway. And you are currently instructed by Gatwick Airport Limited as part of the RPS consultant team to progress their aspirations for a second runway. Is that correct?
It is.
And you tell the inquiry that you were first instructed by River Oak in relation to Manston Airport in December 2015, is that right?
Correct.
And your role since that time has been to provide strategic planning advice in connection with their proposals to reopen the airport principally as a hub for international air freight, is that right?
It is.
Now, Ms. Shembri, you produce 3 documents of inquiry. First of all, your summary proof. Secondly, your main proof of evidence, and thirdly, your rebuttal proof. That's tab 13. Yep, tab 13 for the summary. Tab 6 for the main proof, and yep, and the appendices between the two, and then I think the rebuttal should be freestanding. So if I can ask you, please, Ms. Shembri, to take out your summary proof of evidence. And if we turn to the introduction, I think we've already covered those points, but can I just ask you, please, to read from paragraphs 1.4 and 1.5.
My evidence deals with town and country planning matters, including planning policy. The evidence which I have prepared and provide for this appeal is true, and I can confirm that the opinions expressed are my true and professional opinions. My evidence demonstrates that the appeal proposals are not in accordance with the relevant policies in the development plan, that these policies attract full weight, and that there are no material considerations which indicate or justify departure from these policies.
Thank you, Ms. Shembri. You then set out in your summary, and I'm not going to ask you to read these out, but Thanet District Council's position in respect of these appeals. I think that's all clear. And then you go on to deal with that in a little bit more detail in section 2 of your evidence and in your summary. Again, I'm not going to ask you to read that out. If we can then turn to your section 3, please. You deal there with the National Planning Policy Framework, no doubt matters very familiar to the inspector. I'm not going to ask you to read any of that out. You then deal with the Aviation Policy Framework, dated March 2013. I'm not going to ask you to read that out. You then come on to deal with the Draft Airports National Policy Statement, and then finally you come on to deal with Kent County Council's Local Transport Plan. I'm not going to ask you to read any of those paragraphs out, but what I am going to ask you to do is just to read your summary of the summary of that, if I can describe it in that way, and ask you to read paragraph 3.14 through to 3.16.
It is evident that a key objective of national planning policy is to ensure that planning has a role in proactively driving and supporting sustainable economic development, to deliver infrastructure that the country needs, and to respond positively to wider opportunities for growth. The government fully recognises the major contribution that the airport sector makes to the economy. The government supports the growth of this sector in order to achieve long-term economic growth. The National Policy Framework for Aviation is underpinned by an encouragement to grow airports, fully recognising that international connectivity is important to the success of the UK economy. The policies contained in the National Policy Framework for Aviation are material considerations in planning decisions, and accordingly significant weight should be attached to them. And finally, reopening Manston Airport is crucial to delivering Kent County Council's regional growth policies. The airport has the potential to develop and become one of the largest single generators of economic activity in the county. The River Oak evidence submitted to the inquiry demonstrates that there is a need to reopen Manston Airport. It will deliver much needed infrastructure, which in turn will deliver economic growth on a local, regional and national level in order to wider growth opportunities fully consistent with national planning policy objectives. Development plan policies and decisions on planning applications should continue to protect the Manston Airport site for airport uses, as this is entirely consistent with the national policy context. Using the appeal buildings for non-airport related uses would not be acceptable having regards to national policy.
Thank you. You then come on in section 4 to deal with the development plan. I'm not going to ask you to read out paragraphs 4.1 to 4.3 where you just set out the relevant policies. You then come on to deal a little bit more detail at your paragraph 4.4 where you set out the various policies. I am going to ask you to read out though please, if you wouldn't mind, paragraph 4.4 insofar as it sets out policy EC4. Can I just ask you to read that paragraph, please? Or that part of the paragraph.
So, reading out what policy EC4 states. Policy EC4 is airside development area and states that land at the airport as identified on the proposals map is reserved for airside development. Development proposals will require specific justification to demonstrate that an airside location is essential to the development proposed. Development will be required to retain sufficient land to permit access by aircraft of up to 65 metres, 217 foot, wingspan to all parts of the site.
And you then come on to deal with the issue as to whether the policies that you've identified, and that's CC1, EC2 and EC4 are up to date. I think it's EC4 that is particularly critical to this these appeals. Can I ask you please just to read out the first paragraph, first sentence of paragraph 4.5.
Policies EC2 and EC4 in promoting and protecting land for airport uses are wholly consistent with the NPPF, the APF, the Draft Airports NPS and the Kent Local Transport Plan and are therefore considered to be up to date.
And the next sentence, please.
Accordingly, full weight should be attached to these significant policies. The fact that the airport is no longer operational does not reduce the weight that should be attached to these policies, especially in light of the evidence the River Oak has submitted to the inquiry. The Avias Solutions report is not robust and cannot be relied upon.
Thank you. Now, I'd just like your help with this, please. Why do you say that policy EC4 is consistent with the National Planning Policy Framework, the Aviation Policy Framework, the Draft National Policy Statement and the Kent Local Transport Plan? Just taking those points in order, please. Firstly, the NPPF. Why do you say EC4 is consistent with that national framework?
So the NPPF states very clearly that the government is committed to securing economic growth in order to create jobs, prosperity, and the planning system should do everything to sustain that economic growth. In needing to do this, the local plan policy, and particularly EC4, needs to protect land for aviation use, especially given that there is a reasonable prospect of the airport reopening.
Thank you. Coming on to the aviation policy framework, why do you say EC4 is consistent with that?
So the aviation policy framework relates to safeguarding and states that the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, makes it clear that local planning authorities should identify and protect where there is robust evidence, sites that could be critical in developing infrastructure to widen choice, and this could include airport infrastructure. I think it's obvious from the evidence that was presented by Dr. Dixon and Mr. Kane yesterday that there is robust evidence which demonstrates that Manston Airport could reopen as a viable airport, and so therefore it is critical that the local planning authority protect the land at the airport for these uses, and that is consistent with what the APF states.
And do
So the reference is paragraph 33 in the NPPF, and in the APF, so the Airport Policy Framework, it's paragraph 5.8.
And in the light of the fact that the appellants don't seek to challenge the evidence of Mr. Kane and Dr. Dixon, what do you say about that in terms of assessing the consistency or otherwise of EC4 with national policy?
In not contesting the evidence, that suggests to me that they feel that there is or there may be a reasonable prospect of the airport reopening. In that sense, full weight needs to be applied to policy EC4 in light of the advice in the NPPF and the APF.
Thank you. And then the draft national policy statement, is EC4 consistent with that emerging policy?
It is. The draft NPS on airports maintains the government's support for the aviation sector in its capacity to assist with objectives that seek to secure economic growth. And in that sense, it is still fully consistent with what is said in the NPPF and the APF. More specifically, the draft Airports NPS talks about air freight, which is particularly relevant given the proposals by River Oak, and is extremely supportive of air freight growth, again to help the aviation sector and to deliver economic objectives. And in that statement, it states that it is expected that air freight will grow. So all the signs suggesting that the aviation sector is healthy, and therefore policies need to reflect that and be consistent with them.
And EC4, in seeking to protect the airport for airport uses, in the light of the fact that there's a reasonable prospect that it can be put to use as a air freight hub, how does that then square with the emerging national policy statement?
It's entirely consistent with it, and therefore needs to attract full weight.
Thank you. The next point I'd like your help with is this, please. If we can just go back to policy EC4, which you set out at page 10 of your summary evidence. If we just look at that in a little bit more detail, please. We can see that it says there that land at the airport, as identified on the proposals map, is reserved for airside development. Can I ask you, please, just to take out the Thanet local plan, which is CD 12.1. And can I ask you to turn in that document to page 34, which is concerned with the airside development area. And if we look at the first sentence of policy EC4, we can see that the policy essentially reserves the area identified for airside development. And if we look at 2.74 in the second sentence, we can see there airside development is defined. It says there it's defined as uses with an operational requirement for direct access to aircraft and therefore dependent on a location immediately adjacent to the runway or capable of direct access to it via taxiways. Now, these proposals, are they concerned with buildings that are located within the airside development area?
They are.
And are they for airside development?
No, they're not.
And therefore, are these proposals in accordance with or contrary to policy EC4?
They are not in accordance with policy EC4.
And as far as you can ascertain Mr. Alston's evidence, does he dispute that? Is there any dispute between you and the appellant that these proposals are contrary to the main policy that relates to them?
No, there isn't.
If the proposals are not in accordance with policy EC4, what in your view is the effect of section 38 subsection 6, which directs how the determination of these appeals should be made?
So policies that are contrary to EC4, which is a policy in the development plan, in light of there being, in my opinion, no material considerations which would justify determining those proposals in accordance with those policies, then the appeals should be refused because of the contrary to policy EC4.
And the issue that Mr. Alston raises is, well, he's saying that policy attracts, I think he says it attracts some weight, but he says it attracts less than full weight. And in considering the application or what weight to apply to EC4, both you and Mr. Alston have considered whether there's a reasonable prospect that the airport will be used as an airport. Is that, in your view, the correct approach for this inspector to determine whether or not full weight should or shouldn't be given to EC4?
I think that's entirely the correct approach that needs to be taken. The policy seeks to safeguard land for airside uses. If it can be demonstrated that there is a reasonable prospect that the land can be used for those particular uses, then it should be protected, full weight applied to EC4, and the appeal proposals are contrary to that.
And is the reasonable prospect approach supported by national policy?
It is. There is advice in the MPPF which specifically relates to proposals that seek to promote non-aviation uses, not specifically non-aviation uses, uses that are, employment uses.
Shall we just take paragraph 22 out?
22, yes, I was going to say. Sorry.
One thing I think would be most helpful for me, sorry to interrupt, is that obviously I've got the copy of the local plan. I'm not sure, perhaps you may be able to direct me to it, whether I've got a copy of the proposals map. This might be something the council can assist with.
So you don't? You don't, because it's not available, as I understand it, in hard copy form. But in anticipation that you might want a copy, because I've certainly asked for a copy so I can see where the airside development area actually is. We do have a hard copy which we've managed to sort of Photoshop and download from the internet, simply just showing the key for airside development area and also where that relates to on the airport site.
Really helpful, because I was scouring all these documents and I couldn't actually see it.
No, you're right, it isn't, and I have had that printed out. So if you just, Yes.
Could I have that?
Yes.
See the link?
Yes. Perhaps in the.
I mean, we don't have to write it now.
You don't have to,
but
yes,
that would be
because I've
arranged.
actually got a rather useful clip, which I now
that's
immediately
fine. I
can't.
don't wish to interrupt.
No. If I may say so, it's an absolutely critical point, and you must be furnished with that information.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I'll number this because it's
Yep.
put in. So this will be we're now up to sorry, yes. So 8 is Caxton, 9 is Dover, 10, so this is 10 indeed. I'm approach. Okay. This is the original. Thank you very much. Very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, so this is document 10. Thank you.
I wonder if it might be helpful for you, Mr. Dunn, if I just read out what's in the local plan about what it defines as being the airside area. So it's quite helpful to you. You obviously have plans, but it basically says that it's land north of the runway and includes the land north of the B2050.
Where are you reading from?
So this is paragraph 2.74 in the 2006 adopted. So the very first sentence, land north of the runway, including land north of the B2050.
2.74. I see, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And Mrs. Shumbury, we were just coming on to look at paragraph 22 of the NPPF. So do you have that now in front of you? And the point that we were on is whether the reasonable prospect approach is the correct approach. It's the approach that you and Mr. Alston have taken in looking to the weight that should be attached to EC4. And can you just explain to the inspector why, in your view, you and Mr. Alston are right about that?
So paragraph 22 of the NPPF specifically states that where there is no reasonable prospect of a site being used for the allocated employment use, in this case airport use, applications for alternative uses of land or buildings, i.e. non-aviation use, should be treated on their merits, having regard to market signals and the relative need for different land uses to support sustainable local communities. So the no reasonable prospect test is entrenched in that advice in the NPPF and is what we should be considering these appeals against.
And how should the issue of whether there is a reasonable prospect that Manston Airport will be used as an airport to be approached by this inspector in your view?
So in my view, the fact that there is a reasonable prospect that the airport could reopen means that full weight should be accorded to policy EC4. That is to safeguard a form of development that is in the national economic interest, consistent with the National Planning Policy Advice. And therefore I do believe that any planning decisions should be made in accordance with these policies, unless there are material considerations that would justify not determining those proposals in accordance with those policies. Again, I'll say that I don't think there are any material considerations, and on that basis the appeal should be dismissed.
Thank you. Can we now go please to your rebuttal proof of evidence? And I think in your rebuttal you deal in a little bit more detail with the specific points that have been raised by Mr. Alston. So if I can just ask you please to turn to section 2. This is a section that goes directly to the weight to be attached to policy EC4. And can I ask you please to read from paragraph 2.1.
Mr. Alston asserts that saved Policy EC4 of the adopted Thanet Local Plan 2006 should carry limited weight in decision making for the reasons he sets out in paragraphs 6.6 to 6.11 of his proof. I disagree for the reasons set out in paragraph 6.6 to 6.10 of my proof of evidence. However, I would like to address some of the specific points that Mr. Alston relies upon. Yep. So point number 1, policy EC4 and the local plan as a whole was intended to cover the period to 2011 and is therefore time expired and out of date. So in response to that, I have said that whilst the adopted local plan period extended to 2011, I do not agree that policy EC4 attracts little weight merely because the plan is time expired. Policy EC4 remains a saved policy and part of the development plan. It attracts full weight because it is consistent with the National Planning Policy Framework, the Aviation Policy Framework, the Draft Airports NPS and the Kent Local Transport Plan. The fact that the airport is no longer operational does not reduce the weight to be attached to the policy, so long as there remains a realistic prospect that it can become operational once again. Clearly that is the case as demonstrated by the evidence produced by River Oak.
And just focusing on that for the moment, is there anything in policy EC4 which says that the airport has to be operational for it to apply?
No.
2.3, please.
Even if contrary to the view I have expressed above, the presumption in paragraph 14 of the NPPF is engaged because policy EC4 is contained in a time expired plan and is out of date for that reason, in my view the policy still attracts substantial weight in the paragraph 14 balancing exercise. The appeal proposal's conflict with this policy comprises a significant adverse impact which strongly weighs against the proposals and significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits such as they are. These relate to employment generation, but as there is land available elsewhere in the locality both inside and outside the district, which is specifically protected by policy for employment uses, this benefit in my view only attracts very limited weight. Any potential occupiers could locate to these areas and the significant policy conflicts could be easily avoided.
Just have your help on this. Simply because the Thanet local plan is time expired, does that in your view mean that saved policy EC4 is out of date?
It doesn't mean the policy is out of date. The NPPF is specific in terms of how you interpret whether a policy is out of date. There is a measure requiring for there to be some consistency with the National Planning Policy Framework, and we've already discussed why I believe that policy EC4 is consistent with the NPPF. So therefore the fact that it is contained in an out-of-date plan does not mean that any less weight should be attracted to it.
And is the fact that the airport is currently closed or not operational again a reason why less weight should be applied to EC4?
No, I don't think that's a valid reason. There is every prospect, as we've demonstrated, that the airport could become operational again. So therefore, there should be no less weight attached to it, policy EC4, just simply because the airport is closed.
Thank you. And then if we can go on in your summary, you deal with your subparagraph B, or the heading B, with the issue taken by Mr. Alston that the local plan proposed a formal review of the potential implications of airport growth on development in the district in 2005-06, but that review did not take place and therefore that reduces the effectiveness of policy EC4. And can I ask you to deal with that point by reading 2.4, please?
So I disagree with this assertion. First,
Were you looking at the summary?
no rebuttal.
Right, yeah. 2.4.
Got it? Good. So I disagree with this assertion. Firstly, the paragraphs referring to a review are explanatory text to policy EC2, not policy EC4. Secondly, the purpose of the review was to see if any changes were necessary to policy EC2, again, not to policy EC4. Thirdly, the plan was adopted in 2006, so it was not possible to carry out a review in accordance with the suggested time frame in any event. Fourthly, the review is now being undertaken as part of the emerging local plan, which is how the explanatory text anticipates any changes to policies related to Manston Airport to be brought about. In the meantime, there is no reason why, because a review has not been undertaken, that policy EC4 should not attract full weight. The policy seeks to preserve the integrity of the airport's airside development area for unrelated uses, buildings and structures until such a time as any changes to the policy have been justified. Currently, the new local plan is emerging and policy EC4 needs to be considered as part of that process. Until such time as any changes are made to policy EC4, there is no reason why policy EC4 should not attract full weight.
Thank you. And then you then come on to deal with the point raised that policy EC4 is based on an evidence base that has proven by actual events to be incorrect. And over the course of a significant period of time, the policy has been proven to be non-deliverable and therefore ineffective. So can I ask you to read 2.5, please?
Policy EC4 has been an effective policy, as it has served to protect land at the airport for airside uses and has preserved the integrity of the airport. Policy EC4 has therefore to date, and despite closure of the airport, delivered on its objectives. It needs to continue to do so whilst the future of the airport is resolved through the GCO process and the emerging local plan process, given that the evidence before this inquiry demonstrates that there is a realistic prospect of airport being used as an airport. Policy EC4 has remained effective and delivered on its objective to protect land at the airport from non-aviation related uses. No non-aviation uses have been permitted at the airport during this time, either on a temporary or a permanent basis. And I carry on later to talk about operations stack, which I think we'll come to. Policy EC4 therefore remains necessary to protect and safeguard the airside development area.
Thank you. You then come on to deal with the points raised that there have been a material change in site-specific circumstances since policy EC4 was adopted, which indicates that the policy objectives are unlikely to be deliverable. And these are various points raised by Mr. Alston, the first being that the airport has closed. And can I ask you to read 2.6?
So the fact that the airport closed was a decision made by the airport owners who were not airport operators and who had no intention of using the land for an airport, but rather who had acquired the site speculatively for £1 in circumstances that are somewhat opaque and in order to promote a new residential-led development upon it.
Just pausing there, Ms. Shembry. Yesterday, that was disputed by Mr. King. Can I just have your help with this? Is there any evidence that has been put into this inquiry to demonstrate that any expert advice or assessment or any financial assessment was undertaken by the owners of the airport when they first acquired it to ascertain or to see whether or not a viable airport could be operated from it, in particular as a freight hub?
Not that I'm aware of.
Therefore, is there any evidence before this inspector to support the assertion that the land wasn't acquired speculatively for residential development?
Sorry, can you just say that again?
Is there any evidence before this inquiry to demonstrate that the land wasn't acquired speculatively for £1 for residential development?
No, there wasn't.
Can we come back, please? 2.6, second sentence, since its purchase.
Since its purchase, those airport assets that could be sold off have been. In my view, the closure of the airport by the present owners does not justify an assertion that no weight should be applied to policy EC4 because its policy objectives are undeliverable. Clearly, the objectives of ensuring the future integrity of the airport are deliverable, as River Oaks evidence demonstrates. However, the current owners have made it clear that they will not contemplate using the land as an airport. The planning system operates in order to protect the public interest, not the private interests or aspirations. This is why generally the use of land is controlled and protected by policy. In my view, the fact that the airport is currently owned by those hostile to its reuse as an airport reinforces the need to give full weight to policy EC4 at the current time, whilst its future is resolved through the DCO and the local plan process.
Thank you. You then come on to deal with the point that the CAA licence has been revoked. Can I ask you to read 2.7, please?
So the licence has been revoked. Given the actions of the current owners in selling off those assets necessary to justify a licence and the owner's decision to close the airport. However, I do not see why this should affect the weight to be applied to policy EC4, which seeks to ensure and protect the integrity of the airport. An application for a new CAA licence can be made concurrently with any proposals to reopen the airport, and indeed River Oak will be applying for a new CAA licence alongside submission and determination of their DCO application, and they have already been in discussions with both the CAA and PINS in relation to this. I do not see why the revocation of the licence renders the policy ineffective.
Thank you. You then come on to deal with the point raised that multiple owners have tried and failed to operate a viable airport at Manston. You've heard the evidence yesterday that was given by Mr. Kane and also by Mr. Yerrell as to why previous owners of the airport have failed to essentially make a success of it. None of that evidence has been challenged by the appellants. Those witnesses also say that there is no reason why those past failures need to be perpetuated into the future if an appropriate level of investment and the correct focus is given to the airport. In the light of that unchallenged evidence, can any weight, in your view, be given to the fact that past owners have failed to make a success of Manston Airport?
No, I don't think there can be any weight attached. There are very specific circumstances, as we heard from previous witnesses yesterday, as to why the success of the airport did not take place. That does not mean that going forward, and certainly with River Oak, who have a strong commitment to bringing forward the airport, there's no reason why that can happen in a viable sense and for the airport to succeed.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask you to read 2.8 out then. Can we move on to the next point, please? That's that it's now an effectively vacant site. And can I ask you to read 2.9, please?
So the fact that it's a vacant site is a different way of making similar points, all of which amount to the same thing, namely that the airport is not currently operational. The lawful use of the land is as an airport, and policy seeks to protect that, and that until such time as the policy changes, it should attract full weight.
Thank you. You then come on to deal with the point raised that there's a significant bank of evidence that indicates that the prospect of an airport reopening on a viable long-term basis is unlikely. You then go on to refer to Mr. Yerrell's evidence, and but again, and then also over the page to Dr. Dixon's evidence and Mr. Kane's evidence. But on the basis that now none of that evidence has been challenged, is it fair to say that there is a significant bank of evidence that indicates that the prospect of an airport reopening is unlikely before this inquiry?
No, on the contrary, there's significant evidence that suggests that there's a reasonable prospect of the airport opening.
Insofar as the Avia Solutions report seeks to suggest that an airport isn't viable, on the basis that Mr. Kane has explained that that document is not a sound document, and on the basis that Dr. Dixon has said that in her view no weight should be applied to that document, and on the basis that none of those judgments have been challenged, what weight at this inquiry can this inspector attach to the Avia Solutions report?
I think very little weight can be attached to the Avia Solutions report for all the reasons we heard yesterday, and the simple fact that it hasn't actually yet been tested. So I would attach very little weight to that document.
Thank you. Can we go over the page in your rebuttal then, please, to paragraph 2.11? And there you deal with the point raised that the DCO has made little progress. And can I ask you to read from that part of paragraph 2.11 that commences, I disagree?
So I do disagree that there has been little progress made with the DCO, and there have been numerous meetings between River Oak and PINS in discussing the proposed DCO. 6 public events have been organised, and informal consultation has already been undertaken with the local community. A scoping report has been produced. Discussions have taken place with the CAA, Kent County Council, the Environment Agency, Natural England, Historic England, Southern Water, parish councils and the trustees of the Spitfire Museum at Manston Airport. Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Yep. A draft statement of community consultation was submitted to Thanet District Council and Kent County Council in February 2017. River Oak were also consulting with Dover District Council, Canterbury City Council and 11 nearby parish and town councils on the proposed public consultation, pre-submission of their DCO. I consider that River Oak are on track to submit a DCO in summer 2017. So Mr Yarrell's proof of evidence demonstrates the strong commitment that River Oak has towards pursuing their DCO application to reopen Manston, and the considerable effort and resources that they have expended to date towards securing their ambitions. I consider that, contrary to Mr Olsen's suggestions, considerable progress has been made by River Oak in pursuing the DCO, insofar as they have been able to do so. However, they have been significantly hampered in progressing the DCO by the actions of the appellant, who have consistently refused them access to the airport, which is necessary to carry out survey work required for the environmental impact assessment, and without which a DCO application cannot be made. River Oak first sought the agreement of the appellant to access the site on the 10th of February 2016. After one meeting and several exchanges of correspondence with the appellant on the subject, River Oak was left with no option but to make an application under Section 53 of the Planning Act 2008 to PINS for authorisation to access the land. This was made on the 1st of July 2016. After several further exchanges of correspondence between River Oak, the appellant and PINS, including River Oak agreeing to all of the appellant's conditions for access, but the appellant still refusing to grant access, PINS granted compulsory access powers on the 16th of December 2016. The site was finally entered upon on the 7th of February 2017, almost exactly a year since the first request was made. The appellant has been the principal contributor to delays in terms of River Oak progressing their project. Shall I continue? Yep. So in order to grant such an authorisation, PINS needed to be satisfied that the proposed applicant, in considering a distinct project of real substance, genuinely required entry onto the land. So clearly PINS are satisfied that River Oak's project is of real substance, and in my view is rightly so. Given that the delay to progressing the DCO has largely been due to the appellant's own actions, that is not a matter in my view that should weigh in the favour of Mr Olsen seems to suggest.
Now, Ms Shembry, in the light of all the information that is now currently in front of the inquiry, and in the light of the points that you have just made, what is your conclusion about what that evidence indicates in terms of whether there's a reasonable prospect of Manston reopening as an airport?
So in light of all the evidence and my views on the Aviation Solutions report, I don't believe I do believe there is a real prospect of the airport reopening, and there's nothing that I haven't seen that suggests otherwise.
And in the light of that, what is the effect of that on policy EC4 in terms of its weight?
So full weight needs to be afforded to policy EC4 given that there is a reasonable prospect of the airport reopening. Full weight being attracted to that policy, and the fact that the appeal proposals are contrary to that policy suggests that planning permission should not be permitted unless there are material considerations, of which I don't believe there are any.
Now, can I just have your help with this? Can I just ask you to take out the appellant's opening submissions, please? And if I can ask you to turn to paragraph 2 of those opening submissions. It's stated there that in the second sentence, the only real question is whether the future reuse or redevelopment of the site as a whole would be materially prejudiced if the appeals were allowed. And if we go on into the document at paragraph 15, a similar point is made there. In approaching the determination of this, or these appeals, is that, in your view, the correct approach?
No, I don't believe that it is. The starting point to considering the appeal proposals is the level that it accords with the development plan policies. So that should be the starting point. Thereafter, there needs to be a consideration of material considerations, but it's certainly not about whether there would be any prejudice if the appeals were allowed.
If the starting point is policy EC4, and if that attracts full weight, are there any other material considerations that counterbalance that full weight in your view?
No, there certainly aren't any that outweigh the accordance with that policy, or the fact that the appeals are contrary to that policy. No.
Well, I think you then come on to deal with potential material considerations. So can we then move on to deal with those? Can we move on, please, in your rebuttal evidence? And the first point that's made by the appellants is emerging policy SP05 as something that might counterbalance full weight that you say should be attached to policy EC4. Can I ask you to read 3.1, please?
So, Mr. Alston, paragraph 6.2 of his proof states that revised policy SP05 is based on a robust evidence base and therefore should be afforded some weight. I disagree with this statement for the reasons set out in my proof of evidence, mainly paragraphs 2.12 and appendix 1, which is a letter to Madeline Homer, the Chief Executive of Thanet District Council, dated the 28th of October 2016, where I state that no weight should be attached to revised policy SP05. That's in relation to paragraphs 611 and 617 of my proof. Further reasons as to why there should be no reliance placed on the evidence base, namely the ABS Solutions report of September 2016, are set out in Dr. Dixon's proof of evidence, that's paragraphs 2.1 to 2.14, and Mr. Kane's proof of evidence, which is paragraphs 2.1 to 2.23. These are not repeated, but clearly in light of the significant opposition to revised policy SP05 and its early stage of production, no or little weight can be attached to it. Thanet District Council still have a long way to go in the preparation of their new local plan, not least their housing strategy is far from being formed in relation to the actual housing requirement and where or how it is to be met. It is my understanding that a lot of further work needs to be undertaken on the evidence base to justify the housing strategy in the emerging local plan, not least the whole range of sites that may be available to meet its housing requirements.
Now you're saying that
you're saying that no or very little weight can attach to policy SP05. Can SP05, in your view, counterbalance EC4 as a material consideration?
No, it can't be a material consideration. It's not based on robust evidence, and therefore no weight should be afforded to policy SP05.
Thank you. The next point that you deal with in your rebuttal is employment land availability. And I think it's suggested that there is a lack of available employment land and premises within the locality, which would somehow act as a counterbalance to applying full weight to EC4. So can I just ask you to read out where you deal with that in your rebuttal, and that's from paragraph 4.2, please.
So Mr. Olsen states that in his view the availability of employment premises is more relevant than the availability of land, as this will meet the immediate needs of local and other businesses. This is paragraph 6.4 in Mr. Olsen's proof of evidence. and that there is a shortage of modern premises in Thanet in the size range of 3,000 square foot to 40,000 square foot, and particularly above 10,000 square foot. That's paragraph 6.47.
Please continue until I ask you to stop the vote.
Mike.
RPS has carried out research into available industrial buildings using the Locate in Kent commercial property database. On Friday the 3rd of March 2017, a series of available industrial premises and land capable of providing industrial units over the size of 5,500 square metres or 59,200 square foot. The approximate size of Building 1 in the Thanet and Dover district revealed results demonstrating a significant availability in terms of both land and premises. The search findings are provided in my Appendix 1. RPS also performed a commercial property search using the website of a commercial estate agent based in Birchington, that's Clark and Crittenden, again on Friday the 3rd of March 2017. A search of the company's property database revealed that premises were available in a range of sizes in a number of locations, and the search findings are provided in Appendix 2. Contrary to Mr. Austin's evidence, and based on the very recent information provided in Appendices 1 and 2 to my rebuttal, there does not appear to be a shortage of modern premises or industrial land available in a size range of 3,000 square foot to 40,000 square foot, particularly over 10,000 square feet or at all. Further, contrary to Mr. Austin's evidence, there does not appear to be a gap in the supply of industrial accommodation and or land capable of accommodating premises that are the size commensurate to the appeal buildings, and furthermore, they are located on sites that are specifically proposed for employment uses. No evidence is presented by the appellants to demonstrate that there is an immediate demand for take-up of the 4 appeal buildings, albeit that Building 4 is already occupied unlawfully, and therefore there must be a presumption that this unit will remain in occupation by the current occupiers. Buildings 1 and 3 are in poor condition, as recognised by the appellants. No evidence is provided to demonstrate that it would be economically viable for prospective occupiers to take on these buildings, given the very likely need to invest significant costs to bring these facilities up to modern standards, and for what could only be a very short-term letting. This is on the assumption that River Oaks' application for a DCO is granted, especially when recognising that there are other premises in the district that are immediately available, in better condition, more suited to modern industrial operations and available for longer rental periods. In light of the above, a shortage of suitable employment premises and or land cannot therefore be accepted as a valid reason to justify departure from local plan policy in this case.
Thank you. We've had some additional information put into the inquiry this morning in relation to the buildings and land, employment land that you draw attention to. Can I just ask you to take that out, please? Can I also ask you at the same time to turn to your Appendix 1, because I think it's fair to say that the various premises that are referred to in the clip that's been put in this morning follow the same route that you have referred to in your Appendix 1. So can I just have your help here? In Appendix 1, you're referring there to Barwick Road. You draw attention to the fact that there are existing vacant industrial buildings surrounded by hard standing. And we can see that a document that's been put in this morning which relates to that, and it also relates to the fact that the land has been granted outline planning permission for the erection of up to 220 dwellings. Can you help with this? Do you know when that outline planning permission was first granted?
Yes, the planning permission that's related in this information was dated the 12th, or the permission was dated the 12th of December 2014. However, there was a consent. This was a consent for renewal of a previous application, outline application for housing development, which is dated 2007. So in summary, in the last 10 years, and despite there being permissions for housing development. There's been no take-up of that land for that purpose.
So what's your understanding of the marketing that is currently being undertaken in respect of this parcel of land?
So it would appear that it's still being promoted for either industrial or housing development.
And therefore, if an industrial user was looking for land and premises, is this, as far as you can ascertain, available for that person to purchase and to use as such?
Yes, I agree, that's correct.
The next area that you, or land that you refer to, is the Hamel Business Park. Again, we've got some information going in, additional information about the Hamel Business Park. What do you say about the availability there to meet any employment needs?
So this is a very modern industrial estate with very modern buildings available. They say in a variety of unit sizes. There is prospects for approximately 8,000 square metres of available space here for employment uses, and so this is a very relevant and available site.
Next, your number 3, Manston Business Park. The information that's provided in respect to the Manston Business Park, can you just help the inspector a little bit about what's happening there, please?
So the Manston Business Park is located immediately opposite the airport site. It couldn't actually be any closer. It's a site that we understand is still 50% available. There is significant land available for employment uses, B1, B2, B8 uses. The site is fully serviced. It's ready-made for employment uses. There is more than sufficient land available at Manston Business Park for accommodating employment uses of the nature that's been proposed by the appeal proposals. And interestingly, it's worth mentioning that when the appellants went to Thanet District Council as part of their pre-application meeting in advance of putting in the proposals, they were actually told by the officers at Thanet District Council that the uses that they were proposing were not really needed on the airport site, and that there was land available at Manston Business Park immediately across the way from the airport. Despite that advice, they still put the applications in, and we are where we are.
You refer to land being available at Manston Business Park, but what about premises? Are they available as well, or not?
Yes, there are premises available at Manston Business Park. It's called the Oaks at Manston Business Park. There are a number of units, and I'm sure the inspector will go there and realise that there are a significant number of available employment units there, all very modern, all fully serviced, ready to go.
And therefore, bearing in mind the unlawful occupation of building 4, which I think is the smallest of the 4 buildings that the appellants seek a change of use for, would there be an opportunity for those unlawful occupiers to take up premises at Manston Business Park across the road?
Yes, there would.
Thank you. The next point, the former Barwick site. Again, we can see some information's been put in about that. Can you help with that, please?
This is a site in Dover on the White Cliffs Business Park, which has the benefit of outline planning permission for B1, B2 and B8 uses. Planning permission was granted in 2007 for approximately 13,000 square foot of offices at the front of the site, but that planning permission has now lapsed. I note that 2 acres fronting the Honeywood Parkway has been sold for a proposed trade park, but there is nonetheless significant available land on the remainder of the site, which could accommodate some of the employment uses that are being proposed by the appeals.
And then finally, Discovery Park. Can you just help the inspector? Is that land, or is it premises, or is it both?
So Discovery Park again in Dover, in Sandwich, which is not too far from the airport. The airport is very close to the boundary with Thanet and Dover. Does have land available. Recent discussions with Dover District Council suggested that there's 30% vacancy at Discovery Park, and as I understand it, I'm not entirely sure if it's land and property. I'm just seeing if there's anything in the text which suggests, but I can't say for certain if it is or not. No, it suggests there's development land and design and build opportunities available at Discovery Park.
And I think the originally proposed occupiers, Instro Precision for Building 2, have now purchased land and got planning permission to build their premises at Discovery Park.
They have, indeed, yeah.
In looking at the availability of land and premises, is it appropriate, in your view, to confine that consideration to within the administrative boundaries of Thanet, or not? And if not, why not?
I don't think it's appropriate to confine the search just to Thanet. As I've just said, the appeal sites are located on the airport, which is in very close proximity to the boundary of Dover District Council. So geographically, I think it wouldn't be sensible to just restrict your search to Thanet.
Thank you. And just going over the page in your rebuttal appendices, we can turn to Appendix 2. You refer to 3 sites there, in respect of which information has been put into the inquiry. This, I think, relates to premises. Firstly, the All Saints Industrial Park that you refer to. Again, does that provide premises for occupation for B1, B2 and B8 use?
It does. The description suggests that we have shell condition industrial units ready for fit out, so prime for meeting any particular occupier requirements.
And again, if we just look at the details that have been put in this morning at the bottom of the sheet dealing with All Saints Industrial Park, we can see in the description paragraph, it says units will range in size from 800 to 5,000 square metres, square feet, 74 to 464 square metres. Again, is that within the range of Building 4, who has currently unlawful occupiers?
It is, yes.
So Manston Park and this particular location would also be available to those occupiers?
Yes, correct.
If we go over the page, the old timber yard, again, can you just help with this, please?
So the old timber yard is land that is available. It's of a size that would accommodate a development that could fit in size requirements for buildings 2, 3 and 4. There's nothing to suggest that it's not immediately available. It's located in an area not too far from the airport, so it is a size that I think could be very favourable for accommodating employment uses of the type that we're talking about in these fields.
Thank you. And then lastly, the site at New Dover Road, if we turn in the details to a photograph of that property, it looks to me remarkably like Building 3, but can you just have your help with this? Again, is this available if somebody wants to move there?
Yes, it is available, and again is of a size that could fit in, or certainly a size that's required by Buildings 4. Slightly too small for Building 3, give or take a couple of square metres, but potentially Building 3 could be accommodated in this building also.
And just then looking at the evidence in front of the inquiry, Ms Shembry, is there anything to support the fact that there is a shortage of employment land or premises in the locality that would justify counterbalancing or outweighing the application of policy EC4 in your view?
No, there isn't, and on the contrary, there's numerous references to areas where the local planning authority has suggested that there is almost an oversupply of employment space in the district. Availability, 50% availability at Manston Business Park, and obviously the evidence that we've put forward to the inquiry certainly suggests that there's plenty of employment space available, and nothing that would outweigh the weight to be attached to policy EC4.
Thank you. Then if we go back in your rebuttal evidence to page 6, you deal there with the document that Mr Alston refers to, I think the Local Economic and Employment Assessment report dated 2012, and I'd just like your help with this. You respond to the points that he makes in subparagraphs 1, 2 and 3. The first point that he attempts to make is that there is a comparatively low amount of existing employment floor space in the district. Does that accord with the information that you've researched?
No, it doesn't accord with the information that we've found, and there is a particular reference by Thanet District Council, as I've just said, that a review of employment size has revealed an oversupply of employment land in Thanet, and to address this, the draft local plan proposes the removal of only 30 hectares of older, less suitable employment land for use as housing, so that would certainly suggest that there is land available.
The next point he makes is that existing industrial floor space has consistently low vacancy rates, indicating either a stagnant property market or high demand for this accommodation. Again, what do you say about that?
So there's numerous references in the Economic and Employment Assessment. I would point the inspector to the references on pages 1 and 3. Unfortunately, there's no paragraph numbers. Which states that the majority of manufacturing sectors have continued to decline in Thanet, and therefore this suggests that the manufacturing property market is in decline rather than there actually being a high demand for this type of accommodation, and the research attached to my rebuttal would also indicate this. I would also point the inspector to paragraph 1.8 of the Preferred Options Draft Local Plan 2015, which specifically states that Thanet's manufacturing base has always been very limited and is mainly characterised by small-scale business. So there's no demand certainly for large-scale manufacturing business, and therefore the demand is very much for small manufacturing firms rather than larger industrial units.
Paragraph 1.8 of the...
It's the Preferred Options Draft Local Plan for January 2015.
Is that...
Is called CD 13.1. Yes, I can. What it actually says is that Thanet's manufacturing base has always been limited and mainly characterised by small-scale business. So there is no demand for large-scale manufacturing business as is being suggested by the appellants. And just in relation to that, and if we go to Appendix 2 of my rebuttal, when we had a conversation with Mr Crittenden from the local Birchington surveyors, he confirmed that actually there's a very high demand for employment-related premises, smaller sizes between 100 and 500 square metres, and there's very little demand for premises over 5,000 square metres. So that would suggest that the information in the Preferred Options Draft is correct.
And insofar as the availability of premises for those smaller units, is it appropriate to look at the availability in All Saints Industrial Park and the Manston Business Park? Is it servicing those needs? Sorry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And is that all modern provision?
It is, or if there's land available, there's every chance that it would be modern provision. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And then the final point that you deal with at the bottom of your rebuttal on page 6 is the point that Mr. Alston makes is, well, a lot of the employment accommodation is of poor quality. But, I mean, what is the quality of buildings 1 and 3?
As the inspector will see on his site visit, buildings 1 and 3 are of very poor quality. They're not the kind of property that you would move in immediately without having to do some work beforehand. So they're very poor in condition.
So is that point met by granting a change of use for either building 1 or building 3 in your view?
You certainly won't be getting modern premises by granting consent for employment use of buildings 1 and 3.
Thank you. That's all I want to ask you about employment land availability and premises. Can I ask you then to turn on to section 5 of your evidence, where you come on to deal with the issue as to whether the proposals would compromise the future aviation use of the airport. And can I ask you to read from paragraph 5.1, please?
So, Mr. Alston states in his proof of evidence at paragraph 6.28 that the proposed development would not compromise the future aviation use of the airport for reasons he sets out in paragraphs 6.29 to 6.35 in his proof. I disagree, as explained in paragraphs 7.4 to 7.12 of my proof. This is not least due to the safety and security issues associated with non-aviation uses on an operation airfield and the complications that this creates with CAA licensing requirements and delivery of the River Oak Master Plan in a timely fashion. Mr. Alston states at paragraph 6.31 that if there is a successful compulsory acquisition of the whole airport site, that this would enable vacant possession of all buildings to be secured, and that the reuse of some of these existing buildings in the meantime does not affect that. He then goes on to suggest that if the acquisition of the site excludes the appeal buildings, there would be no incompatibility as between the different uses. In my view, that even if compulsory acquisition of the whole site is granted to River Oak, and this is what River Oak will be seeking, there will inevitably be a delay between the grant of that power and the securing of vacant possession of all the buildings if there are occupiers within them that are wholly unrelated to aviation use. This, in my view, is likely to affect the availability of River Oak to secure a CAA licence in the short term, and also will cause delays to the availability to use these buildings for aviation use from the outset, whilst vacant possession is being achieved.
Just pausing there, Ms. Shemley. Insofar as the process that was introduced by the Planning Act in 2008 for nationally significant infrastructure projects, why was that process introduced, in your view, to deal with nationally significant assets?
My thoughts on the matter are that it was introduced in order to streamline the process of securing planning permission and other consents in order to deliver projects that are nationally significant infrastructure projects. So it's a process to streamline and to move forward quite quickly in terms of securing those very important infrastructure projects.
And insofar as part of the reason for the introduction of that process was to secure the achievement of those nationally significant assets quickly, what does the introduction of non-aviation uses do to that in terms of, even if a compulsory purchase order is confirmed, in terms of the need to then relocate or move occupiers away from the airport?
It would cause delay to the process, which is contrary to the whole intention of the process being brought forward in the first place.
And what does that do then about the certainty in terms of the timing of the delivery of what at that time will have been recognised as a nationally significant asset?
Well, it effectively applies some uncertainty to the process, and combined with the delay, is contrary to the objectives of driving forward these projects in a timely fashion.
And obviously we can discuss this when we come to the condition stage, but the appellants, insofar as buildings 1 and 3 are concerned, have suggested that those buildings can be subdivided up to units of 350 square metres, and according to your evidence, that would seem to be where the demand lies. What does that do in terms of the number of occupiers and the need to relocate people in the future following the confirmation of a CPO?
So assuming units of 350 square metres, if you divide that up simply by the floor space available by buildings 1 and 3, it could produce in excess of 20 units. So we're no longer talking about 4 units, we're talking about 20 units on the airport site, which could be occupied for non-aviation uses. To me, that would add even more delay to the process if they were to be occupied by non-aviation related uses that would then need to be vacated. It would just simply add additional delay to the process.
And for example, in order to render an aircraft hangar appropriate for these sorts of uses, in your view, are alterations to the hangar likely to be necessary in order to facilitate that?
Absolutely, the hangar was a purpose-built building. It serves one purpose and one purpose only, which is to fit aircraft into it. And so you would have to significantly alter that building should you want it to be used for something of a more generic employment use.
Thank you. And in terms of looking at delivery and certainty, and the need to then reconvert those buildings back to those aviation uses, does that assist with the quick delivery of these schemes and the certainty of the timetable, or not?
No, it doesn't, because undoubtedly there'll probably be time where you'll have to amend or alter the building so that it once again is fit for aviation purpose.
Thank you. Then I think we've got to 5.4, please. Can you read from there?
I have provided some additional information on River Oaks master plan for the airport to further explain why the appeal proposals will prejudice future aviation use by causing delay to the development programme. A series of phasing plans are provided in Appendix 3 to illustrate how River Oaks intend to deliver their master plan on a phased basis once the CAA licence has been granted. The plans demonstrate that the appeal buildings will be needed by River Oaks for Phase 1. This is year 0 to year 2, and until Phase 4 of the master plan development, which is year 15. Year 0 is the date from when the DCO and the CPO are granted, and year 2 is when the airport becomes operational. So between year 0 and 2, so from DCO to when the airport becomes operational, the airport will not be in operation. However, during this time, the first phase of on-airport infrastructure work will begin. These works will include installation of the runway lights, instrument landing systems, radar and all other technical equipment necessary for full operation of the airport. There will be no aircraft takeoffs or landing during this time. However, that is not to say that the appeal buildings will not be needed during this time. On the contrary, there will be a need for a number of reasons, as I set out below. So the first reason is that there will be some expensive equipment that will need to be stored on the site prior to installation. For example, navigational aid equipment, air traffic control equipment, and there is a need to have secure and dry facilities for storage of this equipment. That will be essential and will avoid the contractor having to provide alternative facilities for storage. Secondly, some equipment will have long lead-in times for orders, and it will be necessary to place orders as early as possible to address this. Having storage facilities means that the contractor can order equipment knowing that there's a secure place on site for it to be stored instead of ordering just in time, which creates risk to the construction programme. Thirdly, buildings can also be used for contractor welfare facilities, offices, general site setup, which will avoid having to provide new buildings. And finally, secure facilities will assist with the storage of construction equipment. Theft of small construction items is common, so again, providing storage facilities will assist contractors and reduce construction risk.
just pausing there, Ms. Shembry, I mean, if these buildings have been subdivided, or even if they haven't, and they are in occupation and use by individuals carrying out non-aviation uses, what does it mean in terms of those 4 bullet points and the ability of those bringing the airport back into reuse to store equipment necessary just to get on with the nationally significant project?
Well, clearly they won't be available from day one when they are essentially needed, so alternative measures would need to be brought forward. That may be construction of new storage facilities on the site, which would add delay to the process, and it just wouldn't do anything to really speed up the process of delivering that nationally significant infrastructure project.
Licence, what attitude is the CAA likely to take to the fact that the buildings and land is being used by people unrelated to the airport?
We've sought the advice of experts, and I provide evidence in the appendices to my to my main proof, which suggests that the CAA are likely to raise some significant safety and security concerns in relation to having a operational airport with non-aviation related uses on the site.
Thank you. 5.6, please.
So during years 0 to 2, there is likely to be a lot of potentially disruptive activity arising from works that are required to set up the airport for full operation. This will include the need to level certain parts of the site, which may require large-scale ground engineering works, and the construction of approximately 8 stands, which will be needed for the start of year 2. Irrespective of the associated health and safety issues, any tenants still in operation at the appeal buildings during years 0 to 2, and especially those in buildings 2, 3 and 4, which is part of the site where ground levelling is required, will be subject to significant disruptions, so much so that their day-to-day operations may become significantly impacted.
Just pausing there then, insofar as you parents say, well, it doesn't much matter because once the CPO is in place, everything is resolved, are those matters resolved once a CPO is confirmed?
Very possibly not. And again, you know, the delay that would cause the progress at the programme and the difficulties are something that shouldn't be underestimated.
Thank you. 5.7, please.
Once the airport is in operation from year 2, the buildings will be used principally for the uses that they were once used prior to the airport closing, namely for Building 1 as an aircraft hangar capable of accommodating the second most regularly used freight aircraft, a DC-8. If this hangar was not available, this would be a definite drawback to DC-8 operators. Building 2 will be used for the handling of perishable imports. A lack of access to this building would deter importers from routing to Manston. There is no other appropriate sized building of the same quality available on the airport. Importers and Port Health would not accept a tent as an alternative, as such temporary facilities are only deployed at airports as a stopgap. Building 3 would be used for the storage of equipment to avoid weather corrosion and failure. There are no other buildings again available in the airport for this particular purpose. And Building 4, it would be impossible for Manston to flourish as a cargo facility without the necessary equine and veterinary facilities, and that would be what would be operated from Building 4. So, if Buildings 2 and 3 were not available for cargo use, then this would blight the existing cargo apron. Even if it were cost effective to put up alternative buildings, there is no suitable land for a similar facility which would benefit from the same apron access. The only means of accessing the cargo apron by both aircraft and GSE vehicles, that's ground support equipment vehicles, is via the Echo taxiway. Whilst freighter aircraft were sometimes serviced on the passenger apron, this was done only on occasion, but nevertheless relied on the access to and use of buildings 2 and 3.
Thank you. You then come on to deal with the issue of mutual coexistence between the airport and the change of use from the buildings. I'm not going to ask you to read that out, but the only point that I do want your help with is the reference in Mr. Alston's evidence to the figure of 1.6 million square metres, which I think he has taken from the appendix produced in the appendices produced in one of the River Road documents. But just for, in the River Oaks appeal statement, but just for clarity, can you just explain, firstly, what Appendix 1 says and whether that is in fact correct or not?
So Appendix 1 to the River Oak appeal statement is actually the public consultation document which was used in July 2016. I've gone through this document and I cannot find any reference to 1.6 million square metres of new development on the airfoil site. So I'm not sure that that is the correct reference.
Sorry, can we just be clear what we're discussing here? We're talking about Appendix 1 to...
It's the River Oak appeal statement, so it's the statement of case, effectively.
Statement of case.
Oh, which is...
The original statement of case.
Yes.
Which should fall up with that 19.8.
To draw attention to the Appendix 1 document, Ms Shambry, can you just explain to the Inspector your understanding of the figures that are contained in Appendix 1 and what you say about them, please?
So, as I say, we cannot find any reference to that 1.6 million square metres reference in this particular document. However, we have sought to try and identify where we think that figure has been taken from. There was a figure of 1.4 million square metres of new development on the airfield site, which was referenced in the scoping report that was prepared by AMEC Foster Wheeler. We have since discovered a slight error in that number, in the sense that we referred to the wrong unit. It should have been 1.4 million square foot of development on the airfield site, and this is in relation to land that we are calling the Northern Grass. That's land north to the B2050. The figure was sought from plans that we had produced internally, with with floor space references on it. However, there wasn't a specific unit specified. And unfortunately, when the scoping report was put together, the assumption was it was in square metres, when in fact it was in square foot. So it's just an error to identify.
Sorry, forgive my slowness here, but what are we referring to? We're referring
Let's just take this in turn. I think it's I think the document, the floor space reference is in Appendix 2 to the statement of case that was put in. So if we go back to that document.
So we're looking at the statement of case that was put in by River.
That's correct, sir. CD 19.8.
CD 19.8. And I was referring to...
You referred to Appendix 1. Yeah.
Document that was produced by River Investment Corporation regarding its entitled...
That's correct, sir.
Blueprint for Success.
That's correct. And then there's a second document,
Right.
which is Appendix 2. Which... No, they don't.
You look at Appendix 2.
Yes.
You get the after plan.
No, very helpful. I see.
4 million in it is the thing called description of proposed river.
That's right.
It's right. The witness referred to the scoping report, which no doubt does as well, but so does this.
So it starts off with this map with these
Yes.
lines on it. Yeah.
That's right. And then if you go on in the document to page 14, I think the Inspector's probably just got them in a three version. Yeah. Yeah. So if you just carry on to page 15, so where the text starts.
Got a load of plans in this.
That looks like you're getting.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's it. And you'll see there that Ms Shembry, that there's a reference, first of all, in the second paragraph on page 16 to 66,000 square metres and 120,000 square metres. Do you see that there in the second paragraph? On page 15. Do you see that there? And then if you turn to page 16, in the final paragraph, towards the end, there's a reference to the total floor space of 1.4 million square metres. And what Mr Alston may have done is he may have combined those figures in order to get to a figure of 1.6 million square metres. But insofar as that has been done, as I understand it, what you're saying is that it shouldn't be square metres, that was actually square foot or square feet. And so therefore the actual proposed amount of floor space is significantly less than what is contained in this document. So could you just give us what the correct figure is then, please?
So the correct figure should be 1,400,000 square feet, which equates to 130,064 square metres.
So it should be in square feet.
It should be in square feet.
This is the initial proposal indicated that it would support multiple business units of various sizes and layouts with an approximate total floor space of, and you're saying it should be 1.4 million square feet.
Correct. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and you did helpfully just provide me with
The meters. Yeah, that's where I work. So it's 130,064. 130,064 square metres.
And the point you were making, sorry to interrupt, but you were saying that you were wondering whether Mr. Alston had incorrectly added that figure to which figure?
It's the figure in paragraph 2. So if you go back a page to page 15, in paragraph 2, there is reference to the new cargo facilities and an area. Yes, the 66,000 square metres. Yes, or the.
And that is right. Is it that the meterage is right there?
That's right there. Yes,
And the 120,000 is right as well.
it is. Yes, correct.
So the only place it's wrong is on the following page.
On the following page, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I think I'm sort of where I need to be. Right.
So just following on from that correction, I think the point that Mr Alston makes is he says, oh well, you're proposing so many more additional buildings, does it really matter too much in respect of these buildings being put over to some other different sort of use? And what's your response to that?
As I've just sort of discussed previously, the buildings that we've imposed for the appeals are needed immediately from day one, and there are very specific uses intended for those buildings. What we can't afford to do is to wait for new buildings to be constructed. That will take time, it will add delay, and it's really simply nothing that River want to do or should have to do if there are buildings available on the site available for those exact purposes.
Thank you. And if those buildings aren't available, what does that mean in terms of the necessity or otherwise to build or provide additional buildings in a countryside location?
It would mean that you would need to build additional buildings in the countryside, and the land within the airport boundary is within the countryside, and that would be the result of having to do that. There is every opportunity that, of course, land might be needed outside of the airport boundary if the construction programme dictates that we cannot actually provide those buildings within the airport boundary.
Thank you. And then just finally in your rebuttal at page 10, you come on to deal with two other matters. Firstly, the reference by Mr Alston to the Airport's Commission report dated July 2015, where he states that effectively that report identified no strategic need for an airport at Manston. Is that, in your view, a fair representation of the Airport Commission's conclusions in that respect?
No, I don't think it's a fair representation. Appendix 2 of the Airports Commission report, which is the core document 18.1, specifically states that there is potentially a role for Manston Airport as a reliever airport, and so therefore I don't think what Mr. Austin has said is correct in context, and that there is a recognised role for Manston in that sense.
And in looking at what a reliever airport constitutes, i.e. the concept of a reliever airport, is that defined in the Commission report?
Mark.
It's paragraph 6.2, I think you say at... sorry.
Yes, there is a definition for a reliever airport. It is 6.2 in my rebuttal. That is to support and or financial incentives to encourage growth of airports, providing dedicated support for the business and general aviation markets, with potential additional benefit of reducing the use of congested airports for this traffic.
Is that what is proposed by River Oak for Manston?
Yes, I think the uses that are being proposed by Manston are very comparable to those defined in the sense of a reliever airport, so it is performing that function.
And therefore, is there any reason in your view as to why what the Airports Commission report said should act as a material consideration to outweigh the application of policy EC4?
No, it's not a valid material consideration in my opinion.
And then the final matter that you need to deal with is Operation Stack. Again, Mr. Alston says, oh well, there's a special development order which is in place which has changed the use of the runway, and that somehow indicates that a change of use is appropriate for this site, certainly in terms of the buildings that are part of the appeal proposal. So again, can I just have your view on that?
Firstly, it's important to point out that Operation Stack only relates to part of the runway, not all of the runway, as Mr. Alston suggests. With reference to paragraph 6.7 in my rebuttal, I do believe that there are very special reasons in the local, regional and national interest that justified a temporary departure from the prepared use of land as an airport for the purposes of Operation Stack. It's very clear it's a short-term measure. It's as a result of the government coming under pressure to find a way of mitigating negative effects of Operation Stack by way of a temporary off-road lorry park. I've included references in my rebuttal to the House of Commons Transport Committee first report, which sets out the reasons why Manston was selected. It's never been used for that purpose, and it only has a temporary consent to be used until the 31st of December 2017. So, unlike the government, I don't believe that the appellants have actually demonstrated any special reasons for using part of Manston Airport for non-aviation related uses, either on a temporary or a permanent basis.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shembry. Those are all the questions I had. Thank you so much.